Hey everyone, George with the Art of Water. Hey, today we're going to cover a topic that probably is the least favorite of all of us, and that is tank maintenance. That includes water changes and a few other things that I think are really important to keep your fish tanks very healthy. The number one thing that most people get out of the hobby for is because of algae issues and things like that that they're continuously uh, fighting, and kind of takes the joy out of the hobby itself. I'm showing you this particular tank because it's one of my tanks that I use for um, putting new fish in and sort of putting them in a confined area, quarantined area where I know that they're not going to get into the regular population of my fish before I know that they're healthy. It doesn't matter who your supplier is and how much you trust them, things can happen, and it does take patience sometimes to make sure that you're doing all the right things to keep all of your fish very, very healthy. Um, it gets by all of us once in a while. It has me. I'm not perfect, but I think that if you follow some of the tips that I'm about to tell you, as far as water changes and using some of the products that I have in front of me here, I think that you're going to find this is a very worthwhile video to watch, and you're going to benefit by it because you're not going to have some of the headaches that other people have who are a little bit impatient and a little bit lazy about what they do with their aquariums. So, the first thing I want to talk about is when you first scape and start a new aquarium. This particular aquarium here is one of my favorites. It's been talked about and has the most hits of any video that I have had since I started my YouTube channel, The Art of Water. And the reason why I say that is because this seems to be one of the most looked up tanks in the Nano 5 gallons to 10 gallon size tanks. This is a top fin. It is a 5.7 gallon, is what they call it. Now, I don't I think that they're talking about the extra zero point 0.7 as being water in this filtration area back here. But regardless, I call it a 5 gallon tank. Now, one of the things that I talk about whenever I'm scaping a tank, or I think about, I should say, and I will pass on to you, is that when you are starting a tank, that you have to keep in mind that the 5 gallons that you're talking about is a completely empty tank. No substrate, no rocks, no plants, no wood. And I absolutely believe that you have to consider that by the time you're done, we are talking about roughly 3.5 gallons of actual space. Now, what does that say to you and me? That tells us that this tank is really going to be for nano fish and some invertebrates and that sort of thing, such as shrimp, etc. Now, make sure before you do put shrimp in any of these tanks that they are shrimp safe. If you look at the area down at the bottom here where the water is pulled through, look at the shrimp that you're getting and make sure those shrimp are big enough that they're not going to get sucked into that system. That can happen. Anybody that has a hang off the back filtration system, again, the little water suction area that has the tube that comes down, make sure that you have some kind of a sponge over the top of that if you have invertebrates, because they will get sucked up into many of these because they are small creatures that are not very big when you get them. Yes, they can get bigger and avoid being sucked into these things, but I just think as a preventative thing that you want to keep a sponge of some kind in there, or don't put invertebrates in something that you're unsure of. I do not have shrimp in this tank for that very reason, is I've always been concerned with down in this area that it's a little bit too big of an area for shrimp to move around freely and not be subject to the possibility of being sucked into the system. Now, if they were to get sucked into the system, they would absolutely do fine back into that filtration area, because that filtration area is full of good little things for shrimp to eat, but you don't get to see your shrimp that way. Anyway, the most important thing I think with starting a tank and maintaining a tank is water changes. And I cannot stress that enough. It's probably the most important thing other than cycling your tank the proper way. Now let's talk about cycling your tank the proper way. Many people out there that are in the hobby learn lessons the hard way because they're not willing to be patient enough to let a tank cycle naturally. Now, I believe, even though there are products out on the line or in the stores that you can get that can cycle a tank very rapidly because they add bacteria that's in a bottle to your system, and I know people that use those, throw fish in right away and blah, 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 and they end up with a disaster a week later. I believe that the best way to cycle a tank is to cycle a tank naturally. Now, what I mean by naturally is to let the tank cycle without any intervention whatsoever of chemicals or bacterial matter that is purchased and put into the tank in a way other than by nature itself. What kinds of cycling processes happen during the time of a cycle is really, it's a time thing. Most tanks will cycle 6 to 7 weeks depending on the tank itself. Now, I have had this tank set up for almost a year. I know that it's cycled. I know that there are no issues with water parameters and that sort of thing at all in this tank, because the water parameters, which I check just occasionally because I don't worry about them any longer, I can tell the health of the tank by just looking at it because I've been doing this for so long. Now, that doesn't mean that I never do checks on water parameters and I don't test my water. It just means that I don't test it very often because I know my tanks well enough to know that they're in good shape. I would say that when you're first cycling a tank, water maintenance on that is the most important thing. The first thing I'm going to tell you is the first 3 weeks of cycling a tank, I suggest doing a 50% water change every other day for the first 3 weeks. That seems like a lot, but when you think about the way this tank is set up, by the time you get your hardscape in there on a 5-gallon tank, you're really talking about 3.5 gallons of water, which is not a lot. If you can't do maintenance on 3.5 gallons of water by changing the water every other day during the first 3 weeks of a cycle of a tank, then you really probably shouldn't be in this hobby, because that's really not a lot to ask. You're talking 10 or 15 minutes every other day, which is a big nothing, and you will be so much better off by doing that and letting it cycle naturally. Now, I believe in natural cycles for 2 reasons. Number one, I think that they don't add anything to the tank that shouldn't be in there out of a bottle. There's a lot of things we don't even know that are in these things that I don't want to get into because people will disagree with me on that, and that's okay. But the bottom line is the natural cycle is the best way to do that. And if you can add a 50% water change in every other day for the first 3 weeks, once you get past that first 3 weeks, you can then start by doing a water change 50% twice a week for the last 3 weeks before your tank cycles. Now, in that last 3 weeks, as I said, you're going to do 50% water changes twice a week, and you can do that however you want. I suggest doing it about every 3.5 days approximately. That's works with your schedule. You can figure out how to do that, and your water parameters you're going to find once your tank is cycled are going to be top notch. You're not going to have anything in your tank that's been chemically added or forced cycling and that sort of thing. I have friends that bring over, or have not brought over, but have suggested that they bring over some of the filters or the gravel or substrate in their tanks to start one of my tanks. I just don't do that. I don't allow it simply because I don't know exactly what's going on with their tank. If you start with a clean pallet, a clean canvas on a fish tank, you are going to have less problems, and it only makes sense that you would, because you absolutely are doing it yourself and you know every step of the way what has happened with your tank. So once I get past the cycled part of a tank and I start to add livestock, fish, whatever, invertebrates, of course, we're now adding to the bioload of the tank. So when I put fish in, I go right back to an every other day for about a week to 2 weeks to stabilize the tank of doing 50% water changes again. And then I drop down to, for one more week, 50% twice a week. And then I go to, which is my standard, 50% water change a week, regardless of how old the tank is or how long it's been established. People will argue with me that that's too much, you don't need to do that, it's overdoing it, whatever. I have found that I have no problems whatsoever with tanks that I do this to. I have no algae issues. I have no issues with ammonia spikes, nitrites, nitrates, none of that. And my fish do extremely well. I lose very, very little fish. I've hardly lost maybe 1 or 2 fish in the last 2 years. And those were for things that had nothing to do with my lack of maintenance or anything like that. Now, the other thing that you're going to notice is how beautiful the plants are in here. These plants have been in here for a long time. Some of these plants have been added, some have been removed based on me rescaping the tank occasionally. But for the most part, most of what you see in here, 90% of it, I would say, has been in here from the time that I started the tank on. And like I said, I am doing in this particular tank, this is a quarantine tank, by the way. There are sepia tetras in here, and they're not in here permanently. There's 11 of them in this 5-gallon aquarium, and they're very small. They're very, very tiny guys, and they will not remain in here for anything more than about 3 weeks, and then they'll be moved to my larger community tank that's a 50-gallon tank. But in the process, these guys are doing fine. Everybody's happy and healthy in here. Got a little territorial things going on occasionally, but not anything really significant at all. I want to talk about 2 products that I think are really important during water changes and for any kind of tank maintenance where you're removing large amounts of water, or if you're starting over and you're using your old substrate or your old filter to keep your bio system in good shape. I recommend both of these products. I'm losing my voice. A little bit too much excitement for the 4th of July there. Anyways, the first product I want to talk about is this one right here called Stability. Stability is made by Seachem. Now, Seachem does not give me anything at all to promote these products. I use them simply because I found that they're excellent products and they work really well for everything that I do. This particular one made by Seachem is called Stability, and it is exactly that. It's for new tank stabilization systems for marine and freshwater, so you kind of kill two birds with one stone. It rapidly and safely establishes a biofilter. Well, that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to maintain a biofilter, but meaning the same thing. So in other words, it prevents new tank syndrome or large water changes. It prevents the system in your tank, your biofiltration, to not be thrown out of whack. Follow the instructions on the back of it for how much you should use, and you'll find that that is an amazing product. The nice thing about it is you can't overuse it either. If you put a little bit more in than what it says on the back of the instructions, you will find that you absolutely will not have any issues when you're doing large water changes whatsoever. Now, I'm going to cut this a little bit short here, this video, because I'm getting a little long in the tooth on it. But the second product I want to talk about is Prime, concentrated conditioner for marine and fresh water. Detoxifies ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates, removes chlorine and chloramines. And the reason why I use this, other than just a standard chlorine remover for my tanks, is because it does exactly what it says on there. It aids in the other product, Stability, in helping to make sure that there are no spikes in ammonia, nitrites, nitrates, but at the same time, it also removes any chlorine or chloramines that are in the water. So, to sum this up and to sort of end this video with a recap of what I talked about, the maintenance on a tank is water changes, or the most important, in my opinion, of anything that you can possibly do. If you follow what I do, after you have a well-established tank, a well-cycled tank, you can really have the most healthy tank that you can possibly think of, and be the envy of all your friends by making sure that if you just do those 50% water changes once a week, you can see this water in here is absolutely pristine. Other than having to go in here occasionally and take a toothbrush and remove a little bit of algae here and there. I have some autocyclids in here, just two, that really do the job, but I have to subsidize them with some algae tablets because there just isn't any algae in here enough to even sustain them. So if you do the 50% water changes once your tank is established, at least once a week, you're going to find that your tank is going to thrive. Your plants are going to be brilliant. They're going to be in perfect condition all the time. You're just absolutely not going to have to go through some of the heartaches that some people do once they add fish and overload the system and neglect it by not doing proper water changes. Anyways, that's really about it for the video here. I'm going to end it there. And if you can go out and get Stability and Prime, you're going to love both of those products. Do those 50% water changes at least once a week, like I suggested, and you're going to have a tank as beautiful as this one right here. George with the Art of Water. We'll talk again soon.